When you think of the modern university chancellor, you probably have in mind someone who spends a good deal of time raising money, recruiting students, and doing whatever he or she can to help the university meet its strategic mission. And if asked about what kind of extracurricular activities that chancellor engages in, you probably wouldn't say perform in the adult film industry. And yet, today's guest, Dr. Joseph Gow, and his spouse, Dr. Carmen Wilson, in 2023 were found to have been somewhat active in the adult entertainment industry, resulting in Dr. Gow losing his chancellorship at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, where he'd been a very, very highly regarded chancellor for almost 17 years. And not only that, the UW system also took away his tenure, and Dr. Gow has chosen to sue, and that case is still in federal court, which we will talk about today somewhat. Now, in part of their adult entertainment life, Joe and Carmen call themselves the sexy, happy couple making cooking videos.
Hi, I'm Carmen.
And I'm Joe, and we are the Sexy Happy Couple, and this is Sexy Healthy Cooking.
So we're vegan, which means that we don't eat anything that comes from animals. All of our food comes from plants, and that keeps us very sexy and healthy.
And you know, we like to have a guest with us on each show who comes from the adult entertainment industry to talk a little bit about cooking and other things.
And for his part, when he lost his chancellorship and his tenure, Dr. Gow has presented himself as somewhat of a free speech champion.
This really is a First Amendment case, because why they fired me from a tenured faculty position was because they didn't like the books and videos my wife and I made on our own time and put on the internet. And so this is really depriving me of my First Amendment rights as a U.S. citizen.
The Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression sent us the following statement, in part saying Joe Gow is suing the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse to vindicate his rights to engage in protected expression outside the classroom. We support Gow's drive to hold UW accountable for violating his fundamental First Amendment rights.
And that's what we're really going to be talking about today. When a faculty member, a chancellor, really anyone in the university setting, has been found to have engaged in the adult entertainment industry, should that automatically result in them losing their tenure, their position, or is that covered under what we traditionally called academic freedom and free speech rights of professors? We're going to discuss this today with Joe and Carmen, and we also have Dr. Chris Terry, former student of mine, who's now a professor at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, in media law. Let me tell you a little bit about Joe and Carmen. Carmen Wilson, PhD, earned her doctorate in counseling psychology from Iowa State University and served at multiple Midwestern universities in top administrative positions, including as chief of staff, dean, and vice president of academic and student affairs. Dr. Joe Gow served as chancellor of UW La Crosse from 2007 to 2023, following service as dean of the College of Liberal Arts at Winona State University and as interim president of Nebraska Wesleyan University. He earned his doctorate degree in speech communication from Penn State. So we're talking about two very accomplished people here who took on this quote unquote unusual hobby and have paid a price for it. Stick around. I think you're going to find this discussion to be a real fascinating one. Joe Gow, Carmen Wilson, Chris Terry, thanks so much for doing this. I so greatly appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thanks
it's always great to be here.
Pleasure.
Absolutely. Joe and Carmen, let me start off with you. So it's been about 2 years now since this controversy that resulted in Joe being removed as UW La Crosse chancellor and then also losing tenure. Just before we get into the whole controversy, how are you guys doing right now?
Well, I guess we're doing all right. I mean,
Yeah.
we think about that from time to time. This is such a novel, turn of events that we never could have planned it. And it's funny to think back when we, started making the videos, and that took years, and nobody knew about it, and we lived our lives and all of that. And then when it came out so suddenly and in such a huge way, everything is changed. And you couple that with, I was retiring from the chancellor job anyway. She was really done with academia because of how she had been treated. So it's really been just sort of an adjustment. And sometimes you think, well, if we didn't have the big scandal and had just sort of retired, what would that be like? So on balance, we are delighted that people are still interested in talking to us. It's a thrill to go to like Christopher's classes in Minnesota. So we feel very fortunate that we're doing something that is interesting.
How about you, Carmen?
Yeah, I mean, I would say we're doing well. We're doing things that I guess retired people do. We hardly think of ourselves as retired, but that's the best way to describe it. We just got back from visiting our grandchildren for a week, and that was super fun. And I'm looking out on my back patio with all of my patio garden that I normally do, tomatoes and peppers and cucumbers and plants and herbs and whatnot. And I do a lot of cooking.
Mhm.
I had a cooking project where I cooked my way through one of my favorite chef's cookbooks and made every meal in the cookbook and posted it on his Facebook page. And so,
Cool.
we have lots of hobbies and we have lots of fun.
Speaking of hobbies, your hobby, of course, is unusual. When people think of university administrators, they think their hobbies might be traveling or golf or or something. Your unusual hobby dealt with being essentially in the adult entertainment industry. How did you develop this unusual hobby?
Well, you know, I ought to add, and it's nice that you both are media studies professors. I mean, it's not like just a sort of carefree thing, actually. I mean, there's a lot of thought that goes into it, and we got together both coming out of failed marriages, and we're in midlife, and we're like, well, what are you interested in, and sexually? And I mean, that was really a revelation for me that she was open to doing that kind of thing. And so we put our toe in the water, so to speak, just a real simple way, go and buy a camcorder at Best Buy and experiment with it. And we found out pretty quickly that to make a decent tape, you need some real, you need a crew, you need some thought to go into it, you need equipment, and so that's what led us into that professional world where people were very kind to us and continue to be. So, it wasn't something that sort of happened overnight, but it evolved, I think, in a real natural and interesting way.
So you were the one, Joe, that first raised the possibility, it sounds like. And Carmen, like, what do you remember, like, what was your initial response? Was it like, yeah, let's do this, or did you have
Oh
some
yeah, I
doubts?
like, yeah, that sounds cool. Let's give that a try. I mean, I grew up, I'm an only child, and my dad was a professor and my mom dabbled in various things, but they had a subscription to Penthouse when I was growing up, and it was out on the table, face down, but nonetheless, it was there. And so I was exposed to pornography at a very young age in a very positive way,
Mhm.
really. And so I didn't have any qualms about it the way that some people can. And I thought, well, why not give it a try? If we hate it, we won't do it anymore. But it turned
Yeah.
out that, it was fun. And there was the first time we went to a professional set. There were I had my hair and makeup done, And there was one camera person, a cameraman, and he had an assistant. And I wondered, is this going to be, how is this going to work? But it was surprisingly comfortable. I mean, because they made it so. They are professionals. They are all about, the talent and what do you need and how can we help you feel comfortable? And are you too warm? Are you too cold? Do you need a minute by yourselves? Can I get you a glass of water? Whatever it is, and they're there. And at one point we needed to move some furniture and Joe and I are jumping in to move it. And they're like, no, you're the talent. You don't do anything. And so it was, I think, the biggest surprise for me in getting into working with people in the industry was just how professional and friendly and supportive they are. It's really, you wouldn't think it going in.
And
Okay.
I can
Go
see
ahead.
John Prine album there and
Yeah.
the guitar. So I think we're musical people too. It's very similar to playing with a band. I
Yeah.
mean, you get a bunch of people together, they're collaborating. It is creative. I mean, some people would maybe debate that, but our material we think is very creative and we have a lot of fun doing it.
Well, Joe, in 2018, and Chris, we're going to bring you in here shortly. In 2018, you kind of gave off some clues that you were interested in the adult entertainment industry when Nina Hartley, the porn star / educator, was invited to UW La Crosse. And I remember in 2018, I'm a faculty member at UW Oshkosh. I remember hearing about that invitation, thinking, "Oh, that's interesting." Right? What led to that? And then tell us a little bit about the controversy that came about.
Yeah, this was at a time just after the UW system put out their commitment to academic freedom and freedom of expression. And I sat in all these board meetings and chancellor meetings, and everybody was just, we need free speech and we got to challenge people and we got to give them perspectives they're not going to hear anywhere else. And, let's really do this. And I'm an old speech teacher. I mean, that's how I came up, teaching the basic course back in, 1984 at the University of Alabama. And so I was like, oh, this is exciting. Matter of fact, the president at the time, he had a memo to the chancellors, have an event, do something for Free Speech Week. So I thought, oh, this is cool. Let's see, what could we do? And Carmen and I talked and we said, based on our experience, we don't want to do anything that's hateful. That we do not subscribe to. We granted, people have the free speech to say whatever they want, but it doesn't interest us. And so we thought, what is something
And we
that,
want to stay out of politics.
yeah, we thought, like
Yeah, right.
that's what turned out.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought, sexuality, there's no like left and right on that. It's a topic. And it's actually something that we have all the time on college campuses. I know you both on your campuses, there are probably like Sex Week and, we're always stressing safe, consensual adult sexuality. And so I was in a class actually that was about sexual health promotion. And I was talking to the students and the teacher, and I said, I know this person, Nina Hartley, and some of them knew who she was, others didn't. I mean, if you're like older, you definitely know because she was very active in that industry and with advocacy and writing and so on. So anyway, they thought that would be fun. So we brought her to campus. And I took the lead on that because it was something that was a little controversial. I didn't think it was going to be as, I mean, the woman has spoke at Dartmouth, Harvard, UC.
Oh, yeah.
Rutgers, I think.
Matter of fact, yeah, I was in Madison before that, and I saw some poster for a speaker, and I thought, wow, Nina Hartley would be very well received at Madison. Why not La Crosse?
Right.
And so Carmen was with me on this. We brought her in and she gave a great talk. It's actually, I don't know that it's on the web, but we have a recording of it. And it was, hey folks, let's be serious about sexuality. And she said, the pornography industry, that's all contrived. That's not reality. The reality is what you negotiate with a partner or other people. And let's talk about that. And even this does not get discussed very much. There were some people in that audience who were sort of, I don't know that I'd say confrontational, but they were challenging. And she said something along the lines like, hey, if you go out to a party late at night, you need to be really careful about how much you drink and, be mindful of who you're with. And some of the people were like, no, we don't, it wasn't like the way it got portrayed was some porn star came in and said, oh, porn is great. That was like, had nothing to do with it. Matter of fact, your media people, the headline on the print edition of the La Crosse Tribune the next day, bold headline was, Frank talk about sexuality, which I thought was a pretty fair headline. The headline online, same publication, was porn star, it's okay to like porn.
Yeah, see.
And
Let me bring Chris in here. Chris, a lot of people don't understand the role of universities in providing a space for quote unquote controversial ideas. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, it's the forum for free expression, right? I mean, especially in the Wisconsin system, but also in the Minnesota system where I work, it's the space where we have the freedoms and the protected freedoms to engage in, sort of unconventional speech and challenge ideas. The Nina Hartley part of this story is really important because this is when I first learned about Joe and Carmen, was when that happened, as I actually was a very vocal advocate on their behalf. And I stood up for them very loudly at the time. I didn't know them yet. But I couldn't believe that people were having an outrage about Nina Hartley. I mean, she had spoken at all kinds of places. She had well-known author, and she had even been in mainstream films at that point. And the idea that that was somehow controversial or somehow problematic, I just, I had a good teacher who taught me a lot about the First Amendment when I was an undergraduate, and he taught me to be an absolutist. He denies that to this day, but
Yeah.
but yeah. But the point is that college campuses are one of the forums where these kinds of ideas, as along with all kinds of other ideas, have the space to be exposed to people and let them make their own judgments about it. And there's ideas that happen on every campus that I disagree with. That doesn't mean they shouldn't be there. And there's ideas like these, which I think have a space in every marketplace of ideas, especially on a college campus, if anywhere, right?
Yeah, so Ray Cross was the president of the UW system at the time, and I recall him just having a conniption, if you will, over this. Joe, and did he kind of force you to apologize for this?
Well, it was interesting. I never would have thought there would be this kind of, outrage over this. Like, I mean, Scott Walker, when he was governor, somebody said to him, hey, there's a class at UW-Madison about, it was gender identity and things of that nature. And his response for him, I thought, was very reasonable. He's like, it's not my cup of tea, but it is college. And so there's a place, and so I was expecting more of that kind of, instead, what you had was some of the real right-wing hardcore Board of Regents people working behind the scenes. They really laid into Ray, and he tried to kind of give me a lot of grief, and it didn't really work.
Right.
And so then these regents called me up and basically said, and this has not been reported on or talked about much because I think there's a lot of fear, if you don't apologize, we're going to fire you. Now, that was at a point where I was like, geez, I don't know. I don't think they could get away with that, but do I really want to go to war on this? So I made this real lame apology. It was like, I'm sorry for the negative media attention.
Yeah.
And then I had to pay $5,000, which was her speaking fee, which for speakers is not a whole lot of money.
No.
But for an individual, I was, and then they denied me a pay raise, and
Significant areas.
it was really ugly. I still don't know why they just didn't say, hey, yeah, weird, but let it go.
You know, it reminded me of when in the early 2000s, a couple of campuses, including UW Oshkosh, would bring, say, a 9/11 conspiracy theorist speaker to campus, and everyone would go crazy. And Chris, that's the same thing, right? I mean, the First Amendment exists to protect ideas that a lot of people might find offensive. If the First Amendment only protects ideas that no one is ever threatened by, you really don't need a First Amendment, do you?
No, but I mean, the thing about the First Amendment that a lot of people refuse to accept these days is that it's supposed to apply to everybody's ideas equally,
Yeah.
right? It's a universal protection, and it's a universal protection against the government interfering with those ideas. I'm certainly not a 9/11 truther myself, but there's, there's a space, especially in a college environment, for all kinds of speech, even some that I might find a little, well, out there. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I do. And I think that we've been moving away from that ideal for a long time now. All right. I think Joe and I are old enough to remember a time when I think there was more of an expectation that universities would be this place where you'd hash out the controversial ideas of the day. All right. And especially in Wisconsin, that would be appropriate, right? Because we're all about the sifting and winnowing and the search for the truth. And the idea that some bureaucrat in Madison is deciding what's in and what's out, that to me is very disturbing.
Well, the ultimate problem that we face now is most people want free speech for me, but not
Right.
for thee. And the other thing that we see with free speech today that's really problematic is that people want to be able to espouse ideas without any sort of consequences. My ideas are absolutely protected, and that's true. They're protected from the government, but that doesn't mean you can't generate other controversies. But that's how it's supposed to work, right? We're supposed to engage these ideas, good, bad, dumb, crazy, whatever. They're all supposed to have a space to engage each other. And that's what's really been lacking in sort of First Amendment understanding.
Yeah. So Joe and Carmen, let's now move up to 2023. The revelation comes out that you've been participating in adult film, literature, and so on. What were your expectations as to what would happen at that point, and then what actually did happen?
Yeah, we're actually in the process of writing this up as a book and toning down the sex, because that sometimes gets people distracted to talk about this, because it's really quite interesting, we think. I didn't think that anybody would be watching X Hamster or OnlyFans and be willing to say they were doing that and then complain to
What they were
the
seeing.
system.
Yeah.
That's the thing that gets lost sometimes in this conversation. It's not like we put our videos on a billboard in Times Square and people had to see them. You had to be really into sexual material to find our stuff. So I say it's like somebody who goes to a nude beach and comes back and complains and says, well, I kept my clothes on. And we've
And
never
I shielded my eyes.
Yeah. We've never found out who actually turned us in, but I fully expected that I'd get a phone call from the assistant president and he'd say, hey, we heard about this activity you're doing. We don't like it. So you have a decision to make. You can keep going and resign, or you can take them down, and so that never happened, really. The system lawyer and the HR person had one of these Zoom meetings like we're having right now and sort of sprung this on me. We found out about this stuff. Their big concern was, did you make money on it? Because you need to report over $1,000 of so-called outside income. We didn't. We spent a lot of money on it. And I actually kind of laughed out loud when they said, did you make money? I mean, is somebody going to pay to see this 60 plus guy? I mean, I don't know her. That's a different, but anyway, it was quite surprising that they just plowed on ahead, fired me, and announced to the media he's done something abhorrent and disgusting, which I was like, oh, that's catnip. You know, like if I'm a reporter, oh, what did he do? You know, and
Right.
so we had this crazy couple of days, actually weeks, of just explaining all of this to reporters, and that was most unexpected. And then I guess I thought they would respect the tenured faculty position and say, you know, okay, that's untouchable. Well, boy, we learned that was not. And actually, I don't want to get too into the
Right.
weeds, but there were members of the legislature who publicly came out and said this guy should be fired. And,
Completely.
you know, that was tied into some budget discussions that were going on
Yeah.
at the time. And I think it's pretty clear that somebody wanted to make a point that we can take down a tenured professor. And this was kind of the beginning of this that then really accelerated once people got into the political realm of other issues. And we see now all of those professors and staff people who were fired because they put something on Facebook about Charlie Kirk that somebody didn't like, they're getting their jobs back. They're winning their cases because, you know, the courts, when you get pressed on this, and that's what we hope to do too, they have to say, you know, we have a First Amendment, it covers this activity, and sorry, folks, you can't fire a tenured faculty member.
Okay. Carmen, I watched not all, but much of the disciplinary hearing that determined, to take the tenure away. As you were sitting there supporting your husband, what were you feeling in that moment? I mean, were you shocked? Were you horrified? Were you mad? What kind of emotions were you going through in that moment?
Well, I was really trying to focus. I was not allowed to speak, so I was,
Right.
and I think that's helpful to have someone who's only ears so that I could then be listening very careful. And so I was maintaining a, pretty high intensity of focus. But as I said earlier, I guess before we started the meeting, I just was really stunned that none of the faculty asked any questions at all. And that we would bring up, well, and we, as I would pass him and I would say, ask this or say this, and they just, pointing out conflicting evidence and so on. And they just like, la, 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 not going to listen to that, not going to ask any questions, not going to think critically, not going to, do the things that we expect our students to do. Right. And that was just really surprising. And then it felt like people were being really mean-spirited. And I'm
Yeah.
disappointed in that, right? We're all, highly educated people, a lot of administrators. I was just having lunch with a friend yesterday and she was talking about some challenges that she has. And she's like, and I just lose patience. I was never a college administrator who had to sit and listen to people complain all day long. So I never developed that patience, and it's like, yeah, that's what we expect from our administrators, from our faculty, is just to, not be mean, right?
Yeah.
And think critically and do that kind of work. But I mean, as it continued through that hearing and the next hearing and the next hearing, and actually through the whole process, it became very clear that there were people at the top that were going to dictate how this went. They were running through the motions, but the end result was already determined, and that was clear as I look back on it, the original complaint that President Rothman filed against Joe to have his tenure removed included that, he made more money than he said, that, he violated the IT policy and a couple of other things, none of which did the prosecuting side prove. And so that wasn't even included in the final report. They hired this outside law firm to do this huge investigation. They barely touched the issues that were in the complaint because it was clear that they were non-issues. So then they kept trying to find other stuff and other stuff. It's like, I don't really subscribe to sports metaphors that much, but the goalpost kept moving, and there's no better
Of
way to
course, yeah.
it just kept moving and moving and moving until they could say, we're done. We've done everything. And then in the end, they said the reason the faculty committee recommended firing him was not for all these offenses that President Rothman accused him of. They said those were not fireable offenses. What they decided he should be fired for was how we reacted after the fact. And it's like, well, that doesn't even make any sense, So it was all such a farce. And that's, you'd think we could expect better.
And she is the former chair of the UW La Crosse Faculty Senate.
Yeah.
So we know this stuff inside and out.
Yeah.
It was like when, we've been all around. You were a Title IX officer.
Yeah.
I mean, we know how investigations work. We know how hearings work. And I know how those lawyers at System work. And that was really fascinating to see them, do what they did. And then they say,
Joe,
conspiracy theorist and all that.
Right.
I mean, come on. You got like 4 or 5 people on the same legal team, and 2 of them are sitting at the prosecution table and the other one's advising the jury.
Right.
And there's no conflict of interest there. I mean, that's hard to believe.
Joe, you did write an article during this controversy in the Chronicle of Higher Ed. The title was "I Made Porn That Shouldn't Cost Me Tenure." Why should that not cost you tenure? Because while I'm a strong free speech advocate, I can understand why for lots of people, a professor with tenure being involved in the adult entertainment industry is a bridge too far. I'm trying to understand all sides. So what were you arguing in that article?
Well, I guess I'd come back with, and the title was not my choosing, the Chronicle. Why should it cost me my tenure? I mean, this was something that we did on our own time with our own money. We never used identified UW La Crosse or the university system or anything like that. So, I mean, it's completely independent of our professional roles. And so then you get into this, well, then you're a public figure, but what kind of public figure and who made us public figures? These are really interesting questions, but at root, it would be like if you recorded a song there with your guitar and you put it onto YouTube, who the hell cares what, that's Tony Palmieri. It's not an official activity.
But if you had kept, let's assume you keep your tenure. Let's say the courts say they've got to bring you back. Let's assume for the sake of argument that you go back into the classroom, just a hypothetical scenario. Now everybody knows that you've got this unusual hobby. Suppose there are undergraduate students, their parents, that have these deep concerns about a class being taught by someone who has made porn films, let's say. How do you respond to something like that?
Well, actually, I've been in that kind of situation where I've had students when I was the chancellor or a dean, or, I've been administrator a long time, who would say, my professor, they're gay. That makes me uncomfortable.
Or trans.
Well, that's how it is. Like you're supposed to meet people that are different from you. And not all your professors are the same, which I think everybody would agree is a very good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so people need to just say, okay. And from what we hear, there are some students who are really dying to take a class with me. And I think Chris, we went and spoke in his classes several times, and I was impressed. I mean, it's what, a 8 o'clock class or 7?
8 o'clock.
It's
8 o'clock. The students were there. They were attentive. I mean, they're not looking at their phones or anything. They are very interested in what we have to say and what we've done. So I think there's great value in that. And it's sad, they say these people, we don't want to be known as Porn U. Well, wouldn't you like to be known as a university that's on the cutting edge of free speech and really promotes it and lives it? I mean, I think that's a good thing. And actually, enrollment at the university has continued to go up. Like
Right.
Nina Hartley thing. Now they come back at us and they say, oh, you're saying that Nina Hartley, that led to increased enrollment. No, I'm saying it didn't hurt enrollment, which
But
shows,
suppose, Joe, let me play devil's advocate.
okay,
Suppose a 19-year-old female in your class comes up to you and says, I've got a real crappy waitress job. I'm barely making my rent. I heard you can make a lot of money on OnlyFans. Can you give me some pointers as to how to do that? What would you do as the professor of record in that classroom? How would you respond to that student?
I would not want to have that conversation alone, I mean, that could get twisted into something else. But if that were to come up in a classroom, which actually in Chris's classes, it didn't come up that sort of plainly. But I think there is a thing that, you read the surveys, a lot of the young people, I sound like an old, the young people, a lot of young people do want to be internet content creators. And so what we tell them is it's hard work.
It's really hard.
I mean, like OnlyFans, you read about people making up, like that was that story ABC Nightline did about us, and they juxtaposed us with this woman who was a school teacher who quit and does OnlyFans and makes over $1 million a year.
Right.
Like, whoa, that is not what you're going to be facing. Like you'd be lucky to make a few $1,000s a month. And look at us with all the publicity and people interest, and we don't make that much money from it, and we never were into it for the money. So I would say to anybody, young or old, think carefully about whether you want to do it, because you will pay a price. As we're here today, you wouldn't want to talk to us unless we were in trouble, and so that's going to lead to, and boy, different family members have very different views on whether or not this is okay.
Mhm.
I mean, it's pretty dramatic. So that's a hard part of it.
Chris, what's your view on this, on the appropriateness, if you will, of having professors in the classroom who have this kind of hobby?
Well, I mean, I'm sort of an extremist on these things, as everyone in this room knows, but I think it's incredibly valuable for the media students to hear from people who are involved in this. I mean, this is a realistic part of how media is created, how it is distributed, and the content that's available online. And one thing that's happened, Joe and Carmen have been in my class 4 or 5 times now. The one thing that every student really takes away from it, and I hear from them afterwards, is, wow, who else would talk to us about this? But the other thing is that the lesson that they can provide, it is not easy to make that kind of money. Very few people make that kind of money. And so this illusion that you can just go do this and get rich, hearing it from people who do have a high profile like Joe and Carmen, and saying, no, it's actually really, really hard to make money doing this because, it's just so flooded with content at this point. It actually is really valuable experience. They've been coming for a couple years now to my classes every semester. And it's one of the lectures I always hear from students that they're very excited to sit through. But I've only had one complaint, and that was that we didn't have enough time to talk. In all the times I've had them in there, because Joe tends to be a little verbose. Carmen doesn't always interrupt him fast enough. And sometimes we don't always get through the whole discussion in the time period. But that's the only complaint I've ever had. And, my students appreciate that I'm exposing them to this idea that really talks about a real world experience in this way. I mean, where else are they going to get that?
But Carmen, let me bring you in here. When I've seen a little bit of you and Joe talking about this online, and it sounds like for you, being a participant in the quote unquote porn industry, it's been good for your marriage. You have found it somewhat empowering. I think you've made some very strong statements about, especially for women in your age group, to be able to demonstrate that, your sexual life does not end, right, when you're a certain age. But what do you say to the argument that the porn industry, even though you've both had a positive experience with this, that industry is like big tobacco or big pharma, that ultimately it's harmful and hurtful? I'm sure you both have read the articles from people like Nick Kristof,
Oh yeah.
who talk about Pornhub as being, basically a sex trafficking enabler and so on and so forth. What do you two say to that argument?
I would say I've never seen it. I mean, in our experience, we have never seen anything even close to that. Every single person that we've worked with in front of and behind the camera it's 100% consensual. And, there's paperwork we have to fill out, and usually, well, frequently the person that's kind of the director of the set will sit down with us and the talent and say, okay, I'm going through a list of questions here, and I apologize, there's our lawnmower person, I think, is here, so I don't know if you can hear that, but
Can't hear it.
is this okay? Is that okay? I mean, it's a long list of questions that you can say yes, no, maybe not, I'll let you know. So everything is laid out very explicitly from the beginning. No one is ever put in a position of doing anything that they are not okay doing. And when Nina came, actually, we had a luncheon and she talked about this process. And I was shocked when one of our colleagues, not a student, but a staff person, said, I don't believe you. I don't believe that happens.
Well, and she was talking about testing.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
we all get tested for various
every 2 weeks and can only work with people who are tested. And so this person said to Nina Hartley, you're lying, which was just like, and this person was the health educator, it's kind of crazy.
But, so what I would, and I would say, one of the questions that I would frequently ask the male talent is, people talk about women being exploited in porn, but women are paid a lot more than the men. So it seems to me that you're the one that's being exploited. And what do you think about that? And most of the guys just laugh. And one guy said, well, I'm just a prop.
Yeah.
So he's just a prop. But I would say, I cannot speak to this idea that there is exploitation or trafficking, because I have never actually seen it. And research shows that more and more people, especially in the younger people, are watching sexually explicit material. They don't find it offensive. And in fact, after we were outed, students were thrilled to see us. And they wanted to take our picture. And it used to be, before we were outed, they would say, oh, Chancellor Gow, can we get a selfie? Joe Gow, and so I'd say, okay, give me your camera, and I'd take a picture of them. And when this happened, I would say, okay, give me your camera, I'll take a picture with him. And they'd say, no, we want you in it too. So for the first time, I had agency as the chancellor's wife, because I was,
Right.
It was
Now to
so.
illustrate, we just shot a scene about 2 months ago, and you got to get tested, of course. And so we went and did our samples, and then it's fairly elaborate. They FedEx them to a lab, and then they process them, and then they put the results on an app, so that when you go to the set, you have to show, like, okay, I'm cleared to do this. Well, my test results, not hers. Hers came through just fine, and they delayed mine. They came out fine in the end, but they delayed them. And the people shooting this scene, the studio and the actor that we were with, were like, well, then you cannot be a part of this.
Mm-hmm.
And so that scene, we had to do 2 scenes, one with him and her, and then me and her. That's how seriously they take this. So, but to come back to what you're asking about, I think this is like any other entertainment industry. There are people that are, wildly successful, and there are other people who are not. There are bad actors that, business deals and the arrangements that people make and so on. So, I'm not excusing anything, but we think based on our experience, and we got to understand, it's just our experience. We have never seen anything that would suggest people were being exploited or forced to doing anything against their will.
But you both acknowledge that it is a reality that there are, say, college students that are making porn to help pay rent,
Oh,
right? I
for
mean,
sure.
right? So is that something that we should just turn a blind eye to? Is that okay? Do you think like a student making porn
Well,
to pay rent, is it like them having a waitress job?
yeah, I would say yes. If that's the job that they enjoy and they want to do, then absolutely. If they don't enjoy it and don't want to do it, then they shouldn't be doing it. When my previous marriage, my husband and I rented an apartment in our house, and one of the women who lived upstairs with her husband was a stripper, and she was making $40,000 a year in cash, not paying any taxes, I might add, because it's all dollar bills, right? Working 1 week a month, I mean,
Wow.
and she didn't have, and there were places that she said she would not work because they were not good places to work, that the women could be exploited and, bad things could happen. So, you have to be smart because
Yeah.
yeah, I'm sure there are bad actors, but there's bad actors, as Joe said, in any entertainment industry, whether it be music or film or TV or whatever, or politicians or college faculty, honestly, so I don't, as long as, as long as people are clear about what they are willing to do and not willing to do and set boundaries. And boy, I'm impressed with the women that we have worked with in particular. And especially women, and we've worked with women in their 30s and 40s and 50s. I mean, they are very clear. They are like, I am in control of my body. I do what I want to do. And I'm delighted to be able to educate people and engage in this work. And so I don't see any problem with it as long as the person, that's what they are choosing to do and that they like to do it.
And a lot of stuff gets conflated together. I mean, what we do is kind of like making an album of music and
Right.
doing it because you like to do it and saying, oh, does anybody want to listen to our music? Like that's kind of it. Whereas with OnlyFans, you could make money staying home all day, having
Right.
sexual encounters one-on-one with other people. That's not what we're
No.
interested in really at all. I mean, we could probably we could make a lot of money if we wanted to do those kind of things. Carmen gets people all the time, guys that are like, hey, can I connect with you? No, we're not into it. And I have a very big following in the gay community, which I never thought of myself as an
Wow.
attractive man, but I get all the time. And then people will say, well, we want a video with this, that, or the other thing. And we'll say, well, that's not what we're about, So, I mean, it's kind of like the word sports or music, pornography, it's a big area and there's a lot of diversity and variation and
And
like
things can go terribly wrong in any of
Yeah.
them.
Right.
I think porn stands out as as a place where it's more of a problem than any other industry, I would say.
Okay. We've just got a couple of minutes left, and I know that both of you have done a lot of different interviews across many different platforms. Can you talk a little bit about how your experience with media coverage of this has been? How has it differed across different platforms?
Well, I would say that, we've done various podcasts, and Joe has talked about this before, that in podcasts, really anything goes, right?
Yeah.
We can be talking explicitly about sex, we can get into politics, we can get into the vegan cooking, and in some of the podcasts we've done, we've covered it all. Whereas other media outlets, you don't get that same ability to talk as widely as you do on a podcast like this. And it's interesting, we learned quickly on to choose our interviews carefully because we wanted to avoid, what do they call it?
Confrontainment.
Confrontainment, right. And then,
Gordon Downey Jr.
and then the people who do the interviews, they've all been great. Sometimes when it gets to the editors, that's where things can get a little twisted.
And now you're talking to a media studies guy, so I don't want to ramble, but the New York Post, fascinating, just total outrage, right? But boy, they wrote 6 different articles about this, and they put all of these pictures of Lauren Phillips and these women, and it's this like, oh, okay, yeah, you really don't like this, but boy, you're going to write about it and sell papers. Whereas, other prestige press, the other end of the continuum, like the Times of London, they thought this is just all a kerfuffle over, they thought you Americans and your puritanical outrage.
Yeah.
There's a great CNN interview that I did sitting the same table with the day after this broke. And this woman comes at me and is like, well, are you suggesting this is like a matter of public interest or concern? And I just stopped and I said, well, if it wasn't, why are we here talking about it? It's just been, so it's been interesting to see how people sort of feel a need to justify this. And that's why we love the kind of conversation we're having here today with.
Well, I got to tell you both, this is difficult for me because on the one hand, I'm a free speech libertarian, very much like Dr. Terry. On the other hand, I'm an uptight old Italian Catholic guy, right?
Yeah.
And those things kind of clash, right? Because I could picture my late parents just imagining this conversation, right? Saying, "Oh my goodness."
But Tony, that's the point, right? That's the point about this, is that their ideas are just as valid as any of the other ones that we talk about, and ideas that you would stand up for. It just, there's this stigma attached to this kind of speech that's, it's out of date, I guess.
Yeah, I guess, Chris, as college professors, again, and this is not a criticism of you, Joe, because I respect immensely what you've done in your professional career, both chancellor and your free speech activism now. But I think as a professor, I always struggle with how am I best serving my students? And if there is an adult film performer teaching a class, and I'm thinking now as a department chair, if students come to me as a department chair and say, we got Dr. Gow teaching this class, he's a great guy, he gets a great conversation, but I'm just uneasy. I'm struggling with what I would do with that. And you all seem to be suggesting that that's good, that should a department chair tell that student, well, just engage Dr. Gow, have a conversation with him.
I mean, I'm a therapist, or was trained as a therapist. I mean, if a student came to me as department chair, or if I was dean at Rock County and they came to me and said, yeah, I'm having this issue, I'm uncomfortable, I'm uneasy. My question to them was, what makes you uneasy? What's uncomfortable about that? Let's talk about what that is, because I understand, I get that it's odd, it's weird. If you've not been exposed to pornography the way that I was growing up, you're being told you're raised as in a particular religious domination that says porn is evil, sex is bad, so I get like that there are people who come at it from that perspective. And I would just want to say, okay, let's talk about what leads you to be uncomfortable or uneasy, and how might we be able to process that.
Yeah,
I would add that.
Go ahead, Chris.
I would add that I've heard Joe lecture, and it's far more likely that a student would be uncomfortable with me lecturing to them than Joe. So, at least in my experience, at least in my experience, I probably am better at making them uncomfortable with the things that I talk about and the way that I talk about them than the way Joe does.
Chris, I'm sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Well, but that's kind of the point, right? And I think that's one of the things that's made the friendship I've had with Joe and Carmen kind of interesting as it's developed over a couple of years, is that we kind of share in the professor experience in many ways. We come at it from different points of view, I guess, but we all share in that. So
I want to close out, Chris, on what in your view is the importance of Joe and Carmen's lawsuit going on right now?
Well, it's an academic freedom case. I mean, it gets splashy headlines because of the pornography angle to it, but it really is at its core thing, an academic freedom case. It's important to remember, this gets conflated often because people don't understand these things the way the four of us do, that Joe's position as chancellor at UW La Crosse is an at-will position, right? They had the right to remove him from that for basic, if he looked at him funny, they could have come up with a reason to do that. Them going after his tenure or things that he didn't do on campus or use any university resources to do, which are in fact protected speech between two consensual married adults.
Yeah.
That is terrifying. And I don't care what we're talking about it. And I'd be standing up for Joe and Carmen if they were physics professors who had said something that was that was controversial in some way and they had gotten them out. That the porn is just the tool here. The reality is that Joe's academic freedom was directly attacked by this, and he's got a valid complaint to bring that he was attacked for protected speech. You and I, Tony, would be in real trouble if they start attacking professors and tenure for protected speech. I mean, maybe not you so much as me, but I certainly would be in a lot of trouble. And I care about these issues, and I would stand up for them over anything like this. It just so happens to be that it's, this sort of sexually oriented content that people objected to. But that's not really what it's about. It's about the academic freedom issue that they've been punished for. And they've been
Joe
punished
or
for protected
Carmen?
speech.
Thanks, Chris. Joe or Carmen, do you want to say anything about the lawsuit?
Well, I mean, it's ongoing. Of course, the other side filed a motion to dismiss. We amended the complaint. Our attorney amended the complaint. They've filed a motion to dismiss that. So we're waiting for a judge to rule on that dismissal motion. There is a trial date scheduled for September of 2027 now. But we just want to get there. We just are very eager to get into a court of law with a jury of our peers to be able to go through the details that were swept under the rug or blatantly covered up. In that hearing with the faculty, for example, Joe wanted to call a couple of witnesses. He was denied that opportunity. He was told he could not call those witnesses. That's wrong, right? We need to be able to just get everything out on the table and let people decide based on all of the evidence, not just the evidence that the University of Wisconsin created.
Right.
And, in addition to our particular case, there's a general principle here, and they're trying to use a 2004 Supreme Court ruling, Roe San Diego, involving a police officer and videos on eBay. We think the world has evolved dramatically since then. Matter of fact, the forums that we chose, X-Hamster and OnlyFans and YouTube for her cooking, didn't exist in 2004. So really, this does need to be looked at. I mean, we published our material. Like, that's what the First Amendment protects, publication of controversial material.
Yeah.
Like, so this should go our way. And, I know people particularly probably are not that interested in what happens to us in the long run, but they ought to care about what happens with this ruling, because it has big implications for tenured faculty, obviously, and also other public employees. And so we're really grateful that Chris is behind us, and, being on this program is great. So we'll come back when we know more, but it's going to take a while, as she said. I mean, we're looking at least a year.
All right. Joe and Carmen and Chris, thank you all so much for doing this. I greatly appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.